baby was born where it was conceived, atop a filthy bale of hay inside my boss's barn. Luckily, Abigail had not gone into labor until the dead of night. The townsfolk had, of course, noticed the pregnancy, but wouldn't acknowledge it. That was, until the baby actually popped out. This was the way these things worked. As troubled as I was, it was impossible to avoid noticing the stark similarity to the tableau of the famous manger scene. My Abigail as Mary, surrounded by starving animals as she held our illegitimate child in her pale arms. Even this dank, dismal atmosphere couldn't dim her aura of serenity. To the contrary, she appeared happier than I could ever recall seeing her. This made the prospect of revealing my plan for the both of us all the more difficult. Deciding that the ugliness would be better left until morning, I bid my glowing Abigail good night, kissed the baby's forehead, and made my way to bed. A heavy feeling of anxiety plagued me as I walked into the shack that I worked for the privilege to call a home, but never my home. How could a young unwed couple even dream of raising a child when between the two of us there weren't even 2 shillings to rub together? No, there simply was no other recourse than what I had planned. Sitting at my cramped desk, rereading the correspondence I'd received the week before, and shuddered at the thought of the day that lay ahead. Like everyone else in town, I had heard of the old woman and her daughter who lived past the Marsh that took such children in for a nominal fee. Not a place that was spoken of freely, only in the local tavern around closing hours when the real sob stories bubbled to the surface. Normally I am not one to frequent such establishments, but as skunks are bound to stink, poor men need to drink. The story that stuck with me the most was of the former town deacon. He had been excommunicated after it was uncovered that he was having an affair with my boss's daughter, resulting in the birth of an illegitimate child. The center of the scandal being the fact that he'd attempted to hide the pregnancy and the child. Naturally, it became the talk of the town for some time, and all the poor man could bring himself to do was drink to the point of unconsciousness. One evening in the bar, local loudmouth Mark Fisher bluntly asked the poor man exactly how he'd attempted to cover the whole thing up. The former deacon shot up from his stupor and slowly responded that the pregnancy was the easy part. Being a naturally petite woman, all she had to do was wear an oversized dress. After this, he went silent for a moment, and spoke of an old woman and her daughter Amelia, that lived on the top of the hill, who took the baby off his hands. The whole room went silent, and no one inquired any further. This recollection chilled me to the bone, but I also knew deep down that, like the deacon, there was no other option for Abigail and myself. Even if it tore the two of us apart, there was no way we could nurture a child when we could hardly manage ourselves. It had to be done regardless of her reaction. With this definitive thought, I was finally able to shut my eyes and lull myself into a sleep riddled with nightmares full of witches, and all too vivid human sacrifice. The next morning I awoke in our makeshift marriage bed, alone. Abigail was in the corner of the room, sitting in her rocker, nursing the baby. This was going to be a lot more difficult than I'd imagined. She smiled down at me, positively glowing with maternal pride. It was simultaneously beautiful and horrible to behold. The onslaught of emotions forced me to blurt out the plan before I could even manage a good morning. As expected, she screamed several horrible things at me, mostly muddled through tears, and ran out of the claustrophobic room, clutching the baby as if I were giving it up to some unholy deity. With a sigh of resignation, I chased after her to fulfill the duty my beloved did not have the resolve for. Even though I was wrestling a woman and an infant, it was far from an easy task to achieve. Both of them fought tooth and nail to evade my grasp. After a minute or two, she had finally tired herself to the point of exhaustion. I picked up our tiny wailing mistake as gingerly as possible. After all, this was all for his well-being. I placated the child to the best of my ability, creating a makeshift papoose from a blanket of lanolin. I gently packed it in the largest basket available. Initially, nervous to exit, assuming the moment I walked out the door, everyone would have me figured out. But to my surprise, the infant was silent, and few townspeople I saw did as much as look twice at me or the basket. So I embarked on my journey. The first leg was astonishingly easy. Emptying the basket as I reached the outskirts of town, it seemed safe enough to gently remove the infant, but I was far from prepared for the march through the marshes while holding the baby. Slowly and steadily we made our way through the muck and a seemingly endless curtain of fog that blanketed everything within 5 feet. Finally, after passing the worst of the terrain, I saw the cabin in the distance, and found myself subconsciously moving even slower the closer that I got. Finally, after several minutes of dragging my feet, I reached the doorway, carefully resting the nameless child in the crook of my good arm. With the other, I rapped softly 3 times upon the door. It wasn't long before I heard the pattering of footsteps, and about 10 seconds later, a middle-aged woman opened the door. I was taken aback by the hollow, penetrating glare she met me with, introducing herself as Amelia. It took all of my intestinal fortitude to resist taking the child back home instead of instinctively smiling and returning the pleasantry. The place stank of rot, appearing even worse than my indentured home, and that look she gave me could have scared the devil himself. She obviously knew why I'd come, and rather than indulging in small talk, she began rattling off rates and fees. After finishing her spiel, Amelia mechanically extended her arms to take the child from me. Momentarily, I was unable to relinquish him. She pressed on as if nothing had happened, beginning to give me a tour of the meager shack. Horrified by the lack of instruments for infant care, the place had all the warmth of the South Pole. Again, it took all my resolve to avoid turning tail and exiting the way I had entered. But before I got the chance, something stopped me. An even softer set of footsteps prefacing the entrance of another woman, this one elderly and kinder looking. This must have been the mother. Amelia gave her a glare that made the one she gave me seem downright friendly. The other woman took her cue and gave me a far more agreeable tour of the house, showing me the icebox that was filled with Amelia's bottled breast milk. This was the first relief I felt. As dangerous as this place looked, at least there was the certainty that one of the babies, if not more, were kin. Finally, they showed me the nursery, 15 or so cramped children who seemed small but at least fed. At this, I was finally able to hand the infant over to the elderly woman, hoping he would see a little of Amelia as possible. Moving homeward, this hope was the only consolation that allowed me to keep my head forward and continue home empty-handed, knowing nothing of the hell I just sent my son into. The return trip seemed far shorter with these heavy thoughts weighing down on my consciousness. When I arrived back home, it was no shock that Abigail was absent, along with all of her things she kept at what we'd seen as our home. The only solace I could find was in praying that she could bring herself to forgive me, and maybe someday soon we could see our child again. Regardless, she would need some time away from me, this I knew. Before there was a chance for any of this, something happened that would make any attempt at redemption utterly useless. A few days after my trip through the marshes, the local constabulary had ordered the marshes dragged, in a last-ditch attempt to find some missing count. What they found was something much more ghastly. Dozens of lifeless infant bodies weighed down by rocks in the sludge. Naturally, upon hearing the news, I was compelled to give some form of testimony, although the back of my mind hoped within hope that this was all a coincidence. I arrived at the police station the day after the news had broken of the horror of the marshes. Sheepishly, I asked one of the officers if I could see the bodies, as I believed one of them belonging to a close friend of mine. Upon entering the room, I almost instantly doubled back. It was worse than I could have imagined. Tiny purple, some black, lifeless bodies filled the room, all of them decomposing at different rates. Needles ran through my spine as I saw the freshest victim. It was undeniably my boy. My boy whom I had selfishly thrown to the wolves. I gave the constables all the information I could give, knowing full well that it would ultimately lead to nothing. These old ghouls had undoubtedly found another town, and as I write this are surely perpetrating the horrors they conducted less than a kilometer away from my own doorstep. Worst of all, I can never look my beloved Abigail in the eye again, as we both know what I have done. As evil as the pair of hags are, Who am I to pass judgment, as the selfish monster that left my one and only son in the care of such monsters?